Hello, fiends, friends, and familiars. This is Matt Orozco here from Macabre Daily, and I'm joined by someone who I think needs no introduction to Macabre Daily viewers, the one, the only Chad Ferrin, who's been on this been on our interview circuit many a times for his previous films, Pig Killer, Scalper, as well as this year Ed Kemper. And now we're here to talk about Dorothea, which you had actually told us about in your previous interviews that we did earlier in the year. So the time is finally here. Dread's putting it out on October 31st in theaters and then heading to VOD on November 4th. So, Chad, congrats and happy to have you back.
Hey, well, thanks for having me.
Always, always. You've always got a home here to talk about your films because we love watching them and always love hearing from you about them. So,
Thank you.
um, the first question I have for you is kind of a broad one around Dorothea Puente herself. I mean, she's someone who I think true crime fans will know of, and certainly folks in California. But she hasn't gotten the same level of attention as, let's say, the Ted Bundys, the Richard Ramirez, the Son of Sam's, if you will.
Sure.
So, what is it you find most interesting about her story?
Well, I think that she was just, had this facade of this, gentle, happy-go-lucky businesswoman, really running a boarding house, and was more of this Black Widow type who lured these, people in and then, poisoned them and buried them in their backyard. I mean, and then cashed their Social Security checks. So the amount of how devious she was is what really kind of impressed me. I mean, love her or hate her, there's something that can be said about someone that goes under the radar so long, you know, not only gaming the social security system, but also getting away with, multiple murders. I mean, that's, and doing it all with, this elderly woman kind of, fragile facade. I mean, that to me is, there's something impressive about that. No matter how heinous it is, you still have respect that someone was able to get away with this. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's funny that unlike most serial killers that we get biopics on, their motivations are far more opaque, right? They're kind of like doing this because I came from trauma and I've now become this different person because of it, and it kind of creates these weird tendencies. Whereas she is almost like, I think a businesswoman is the best way to put it. Like her murder was a means to an end for her to cash some checks. And so she is this kind of more criminally minded, less kind of psychopathic and more just kind of sociopathic criminal than anything else.
Right, right. And and the fact that that she did this all, she had really an amazing life. I mean, four husbands, numerous children. I mean, there's numerous things that the film didn't touch on because there was such a a vast life that she led, that but you pick the nuggets within that and build a story around it and try to get it as factual as you can. And and I think we did that. And she's just from the bright red coat to the I'm just going to go down to the coffee shop, and the police letter. I mean, there's numerous things of where it's kind of not only her quick-wittedness, but the dim-wittedness of the authorities and whatnot kind of combined to create the perfect monster.
I mean, she definitely existed in a time where, this is going to sound terrible, but it was so much easier to be a serial killer
Right,
because,
right.
like we didn't have the same technology to be able to, I mean, I don't think even like fingerprinting and stuff was really done until like the 80s. And so it's like,
Sure.
and she was still operating during that time, but nevertheless, a lot of her crimes took place before that. And so I think she kind of flew under the radar because of, like you said, kind of the ineptness of policing at the time. And also, same with with the other Golden State Killer who got away with it for decades because none of the sheriff's offices talk to each other. They don't share information because it's seen as an embarrassment to not be able to catch your perp. So
Sure.
it's like these criminals have operated in such a way and that it's almost like they're allowed to do it in a way because they're not able to keep up with them. And what I find so interesting about Dorothea, especially compared to some of your other serial killer films and just them all in general, is that the tone in this one is not entirely focused on the dread. I think of Ed Gein most. I haven't seen it yet, but there's that new Ed Gein show on
Sure.
Netflix that, obviously very stylized. But how did you decide kind of how to balance the tone here? Because it almost treats her with a little bit of levity at moments. Unlike other serial killer picture biopics out there, This one doesn't only traffic in the dread and kind of the darkness. Obviously, there's plenty of that, but there's a bit more levity to it. So, how did you decide on that tone for Dorothea?
Well, I think it's more of, getting as far away from Pig Killer and the style of Ed Kemper, and kind of trying something new when I started with the script. So when I dived into researching her, and there's so many different facets of her life, it wasn't just, running a pig farm and murdering women and feeding them to pigs or picking up hitchhikers. It's kind of had more, she had more going on. It was more kind of calculated. And so that kind of opened the door to coming up with like breaking the fourth wall or narration and adding, and she was, born at a time when, you film noir and you could weave in elements, more cinematically than those other two in a sense. And it just kind of gave me this freedom that really just funny downfall for someone who's been going on with this murder and stealing of money and all this stuff for so many years, and it could not be funny for certain parts. I mean, or the dinner scene when the victims, Dorothea Puente killed me, all those things were just like, it just came out of the research on her and the inspiration of Robert Aldrich, whatever happened to Baby Jane or Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte with a little Goodfellas mixed in. It kind of just it became it's her character kind of came to life for me, and more so than I would say Ed Kemper or Robert Picton. I mean, it's just something that she kind of hit a nerve, I guess, that I really enjoyed writing it, and enjoyed making it. It was really a film that was so far different from those, but kind of staying in the same true crime genre, but having a little more fun with it, where you could freeze frame and bring in a mariachi band, or bring in, talk about her numerous marriages and the downfalls of those, and it was a blast to make.
Well, I think you've hit on something really interesting there is that, she is so different than those other people you've made films about in that she is a bit more entrepreneurial and like, murder for her is a business. It's not so much
Right.
of a need to do this, whereas Picton was really much, Picton and Kemper, they're just sick dudes,
Yeah.
they did bad things because they were treated badly and that made them into bad people. And you can tell, I think, that you're having fun with this one. I'm going to come back to the research question in a moment, but I want to talk a little about Susan Priver here because she is totally transformed in this role. And I'm wondering kind of how you and her collaborated to figure out how to get that characterization right because she looks like she's just having a blast playing Dorothea.
Well, it came down to, we were, shooting Ed Kemper, and I had just finished the script to this, and Sharon Stone was actually interested in it
Oh,
was kind
wow.
of coming together in that direction. And but it was also going into the thing of that it would be a bigger, of course, a bigger budget, but it also a bigger hassle with her manager, her agent, her all these other people started kind of filtering in the
Right.
peripherals of getting this. And I started looking step back, and I'm like, I don't know if I want to go that direction. If it were me, Sharon Stone, and my team of, and we're making it, run and gun, no problem. I'd love to do it. But it would have become something vastly different. And when we were shooting the scene in Ed Kemper where Susan is, knocking on the door, and she's in her negligee, and she's, going on about John Wayne would fuck me and all this. And I was like, it's the first time I had seen it. There was no rehearsals, and she kind of blew me away. I was like, you know what, she's Dorothea. That moment hit me right there. And after we, I said cut, and I'm like, that's it, it's perfect. I said, hey, would you be interested in possibly doing this? And she said, send me the script. She loved the script, and I kind of, said, this is the direction I want to go, fast and fun, and having a good time with it. And she, totally embraced it, did her research on the character, got into it, more than probably any actress that I've ever worked with. She really, took a bite off and ran with it.
Well, yeah, you've really, I think you found someone great in Susan because, as you said, her turn in Kemper was pretty. I mean, at the same time, it's like it's very harrowing because it shows just how, how awful his mom was,
Right.
and what she really put him through. And it's almost an interesting contrast to how soft-spoken Kemper is, but also how violent he is.
Sure.
So I think Susan definitely seems to meet the challenge head on when it comes to going all in on these characters, but also
Right.
showing a little bit of restraint. I think playing it a little bit close to the chest in some parts in Dorothea, where she, has to feign this kind of innocence and old lady ignorance when really, she knows exactly what she's doing.
Right. No, totally. I mean, that's the thing that I think, is funny because when we had a screening at the Valley Film Festival, a packed house, everyone loved it. I mean, I've never had a reception for
That's
any of my
awesome.
films, and it was just electrifying, and everyone was genuinely, hey, I love the film. I was rooting for her, and they forget that there was an actual woman that did these heinous things for a minute, and they're like, Susan just, they were cheering her and rooting for her, and that's pretty impressive that someone can take on what is a horrible human being and kind of turn her into kind of a likable
Bit of
character,
an
and that's so
anti-hero.
an anti-hero. Totally, Susan, bravo.
Yeah, no, yeah, amazing. All the flowers to Susan on that. And I think when you mentioned something about research before, I was kind of curious, what your process is like when you're researching these films, and has it changed as you've gone from Pig Killer to Ed Kemper to Dorothea, and then Richard Ramirez in the future? Like, has do you kind of keep to a specific process when you're researching these folks, or does it change based on the material?
Yeah, I think it changed. With with I'll do a lot of internet research. Find as many articles as you can, read them, especially if they're good ones, and then kind of dive in off to different things like a victim here, a victim there, if there's more information on them, and try to, just get some backstory on them. I mean, like the chief character in Dorothea, and I knew had Ezra in mind the whole time. So it's kind of writing that instead, because people will come, what about the victims? Do you feel bad? I try to write them as, not bumbling idiots or whatever it is,
Right.
that they're, you get a little moment of them as a person or what you think they might be as a person, and you kind of interweave that in the story. The Charles, the character that she picks up at the bar when she runs away to Los Angeles, there was some stuff on him, and you just kind of filter that in, and try to write it as close to the truth as you can. Nobody knows exactly what they said or what it might be, but you try to kind of glean things of, she did help him with his social security or how to get more money. So there's certain things that you add in that's true and try to make a believable scene out of it. And this, the research kind of deals in with finding as much as you can, whether it's a book, documentaries, or whatever. Watch them and let that filter in to help create what you're doing. Like Richard Ramirez was the hardest, is just read numerous books on him. And it's definitely the hardest screenplay I've ever written in my life. And it still haunts me of just how messed up his crimes were. It's really unbelievable. I mean,
Yeah.
it's no bright side of going Dorothea style with that, with levity, or it's a 120-minute snuff film is the way Richard Band described the script that way before he accepted to do the score.
Wow. Well, yeah, and I saw he did the score for Dorothea as well, so it's nice to see him continuing on. But and that brings up an interesting point: is how do are you just that good at compartmentalizing, or is there anything you're doing to kind of keep yourself from getting too deep into this? Because, there's so much reports about, for example, reporters that spend a lot of time in war-torn areas or dealing with kind of really, really difficult and vulnerable material. It weighs on you. So have you felt any of that at all in your research process, or are you just
on,
really good at keeping
on,
it separate?
Only on Night Stalker. That was the hard. That was tough. That was
Yeah,
very tough. I mean, but at the same time, when Dredd asked me to tone down the script, and I'm like, I'm not going to do that. I mean, I'll make an R-rated version, no problem, or whatever
right.
version you want. If you want this cut out of the film, if you want that cut out of the film, no problem. We're on this together. It's a team, but I'm going to make the most if imagine Lucio Fulci doing a true crime, that's the style I want to go for, and make it a horror film, pure and simple, because that's what he did. It's horrifying, and it's kind of getting in a car with Richard Ramirez, the first frame, and riding with him till the is captured. That's the movie. You're not the detectives and all that stuff is a small window of it, and that's in there, like the shoes and the certain things. Diane Feinstein, blowing it up with saying, he wears these shoes and then he dumps them in the, off the Golden State Bridge. Certain elements of what happened of that is in there, but it's mostly every victim is shown and in graphic
Wow.
free detail from the get-go, because I've watched every movie on him that there is, and the one that got it closest is the TV movie, with A. Martinez and Jordan. I think it was like 1990, and it's very accurately done. But it glosses over the killings. You see, it's a
Yeah, you
TV
can't do that
movie,
on TV.
but it really covers the detective side very well, the forensic side, the fingerprints in the cars, all that stuff is covered so well. And I'm like, it's been done well that way. I'm going to go a way it's never been done before. And that's, you're with Richard Ramirez the whole time, and you're in it for the shit, and it's very disturbing. And Patrick had, Dredd agreed, and they're like, hey, as long as you're up for that, we're game, and we trust you. And I was impressed with that. So
Hell yeah. I mean,
off
let
we
you
go.
cook,
And
as the kids say, let you cook. I mean, that's the let you do what you do. And you've demonstrated before that you're very good at being able to put forward the violence. But I think with these serial killer picks, you've done an even better job of showing, flexing your narrative muscles quite a bit.
right.
And I know we talked last before, you kind of mentioned something really interesting about physical media and kind of holding on to those rights so you could release your films as intended. So did you have the same agreement here with Dorothea where, you're willing to make some cuts, but at the end of the day, if you want to bring it unrated to, someone like a Vinegar Syndrome or something like that, that you have the option?
Yes. No, there's basically there were 10 minutes cut out of Dorothea that will be put back
Wow.
in the director's cut, which will be released a year after its release. So next November, there'll be a physical Blu-ray release of the director's cut of that, and Ed Kemper, and also Night Stalker will have
I mean, I'm
a
telling you, the Chad Ferrin box set is coming. It's got to be any day now because you've got such a catalog now where it's almost like it's an obvious sell for anybody that beats Booktik labels saying we've got the Chad Ferrin collection.
oh,
Um,
I hope so.
but you're not done yet, so maybe there's a time. Maybe there's a time to wait and just when you finally decide to put down the director's the director's slate and take a rest. But until then, you're still cooking. So we're
Yeah,
still watching.
good.
And to your Fulci point, there's a bit. I'm not going to spoil it here, but there's a bit of a Fulci tribute to eye trauma in Dorothea, which plays as uncomfortable as it should. Um, Now, I know with Richard Ramirez coming up next year. Is there any other serial killer biopics you've planned? And if so, is there anyone you have in mind?
We just finished Sunset Strip Killers, based on Carol Bundy and Doug Clark, who were a couple of people who found love in 1980 and then went on this killing spree, and
As you do.
as you do, in 1980 Los Angeles, and picking up hookers on the Sunset Strip, and shooting them in the head and then dumping the bodies and having sex with their severed heads. I mean, it's an interesting couple. But the script was written by Chuck Perillo, who directed Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer 2, Ed Gein with Steve Railsback, Hillside Strangler. He's top notch, and
Yeah.
Mike Mescal, who brought the script of Ed Kemper to me, brought this script to me, and it kind of just it happened. And Susan Prever's in it, and she's fantastic, and a completely different role, kind of a true crime 9.5 weeks is how I describe it. And it was a blast to shoot, and I locked picture the other last week, and now it's getting music and sound mix and color and all that fun stuff.
Oh, awesome. Well, I mean, listen, if we could even do the Chad Ferrin serial killer set, I mean, there's so many ways to go with this at this point. You've got your H.P. Lovecrafts, got your serial killers, and then you've got, everything else that came before that. And this question's a bit broader. What is it you think that fascinates people so much about serial killers? I mean, obviously there's the whole um the salaciousness of it, if you will, just how kind of weird and gross and violent it all is. But, what do you think it is that kind of keeps people coming back to these stories? And in the case of Dorothea, you're the first to, I think, to take this to a narrative format. I think the only we've gotten at this point is just documentaries.
Sure, sure, sure. No, I think people are just fascinated because it could be your next door neighbor, or it could be your brother, or or also the fact that I think that a lot of people are impressed that they get away with it so long. I mean, deep
Yeah,
down, you got to be like, wow, that's you got away with it. That's something to be said. I mean, so there's the fear, and also I think in a dark, deep place, the admiration. There's got to be. I mean, how, Richard Ramirez is a perfect example of how many groupies he had, and
right.
wedding. I mean, it's just it's phenomenal. And then the same with Ted Bundy or whatever. So there's just this morbid fascination of the getting one up on the man kind of thing, or getting eluding police, or Jack the Ripper of never being caught, yet this legacy of his lives on for a century. So you know there's something to that of and admiration. There's got to be, it really is something, no matter, how many people they say they hate Hitler or whatever, there's still an admiration that someone who almost took over the fucking world. And,
Yeah.
you just got to kind of step back and look at them and go, well, I hate what they did and that's evil and that's whatever, but that's in a way admirable. And the fact that people keep talking about them and, police, research and use these crimes to catch new criminals is, it's an ongoing study. And the fact that, it's so popular, I think it's always been popular. It's just, I think Netflix kind of helped ignite it with their series. And, I'm the first one to get on board. I mean, I've always liked true crime and forensic files and have been intrigued by it. So when there's finally a thing where you're able to make these and they're able to get out there and people are seeing them and and are liking them and you're able to keep going with it, I'm gonna keep doing it as till the wheels fall off, as they say.
I mean, as you should. And I remember, when I was younger, my mom would read Anne Rule books, and she would always tell me, "Oh, you can't read this, can't
Right.
read this." And if so, of course, the first thing you do is you try and read it. And I think the way that Anne Rule would write about serial killers was this perfect blend of like factual, procedural, like evidence-based research with telling the story of the people and the victims that are involved in a way where you're not just getting kind of the here's what happened from the documentary side, but you're also getting the emotional side of it too. And I think that so
Sure.
much of what brings people to these films and your films in particular is that sense that we are getting this kind of, yeah, I may know the facts from this thing, but I really want to know like how could this have played out? What does this look like if someone were to try and recreate it? And that curiosity of that morbid curiosity we have of like what leads someone to be like this,
Right.
and
Right.
we'll never get that answer, right? Most of these people end up dead, or or they just are so obtuse in their delivery of information that, like Ed Kemper's a great example. He just liked to fuck with people. He just wanted to talk to people, and just
Right.
wanted to string cops along most of the time. And he'll tell them a little bit, but he'll never give them the whole thing.
Right, right. Well, and I think that's the other thing of people kind of get in this thing, what if that were me? What if that were me with Jeffrey Dahmer drilling in my head and putting you kind of, you cringe, like you
Yeah,
brought up the eye thing and, you can just, it's the most thing like, oh, that's, because for a moment it's like, oh, what if that were my eye? Or what if that were
right.
my skull? Or what if that, or if I were in the car with Ed Kemper, I would never unlock the door. I would never do, well, that shit happened. I mean, so you're able to kind of step and you go, no way, that didn't happen. And then you look it up and you're like, oh gosh, it did happen. So, there's things that I think people can relate to true crime more so because they know that it actually happened as opposed to a Frankenstein or a werewolf or any of this stuff that is great in its own way. But true crime hits something, it's right next door. It's, you find out, your gym teacher murdered five kids, when you're a grown adult and you're like, oh my god, I liked him, he told such great stories or whatever it might be. and you just, these monsters kind of lurk anywhere and everywhere. They could be, your parents, and that's, I think, what's more uh, scary and fascinating and exciting. And it's really an amazing genre, I think. I mean, and it's one that
Oh yeah.
I'm really glad I've been able to get into.
Well, I would definitely agree with you on the fact that I think so much of this is because we see how this could happen to us. I mean, even I grew up in a town where, and I don't remember the doctor's name, but he was very famous for this, where he was one of those doctors who was artificially inseminating his patients with his own sperm, and basically had these illegitimate children that he for decades he did this. And it's like it's such a sinister, there's no one died, but what he did is almost more diabolical in some ways than murder, because that level of intrusion is so personal and intimate. And I think that's what,
Right.
again, we see this with these serial killers, are that they're able to get this vulnerability. I mean, Dorothea preyed on some of the most vulnerable people, addicts, older people, folks that were really high levels of trust. I think Briggs Stevens plays the character perfectly of the woman with the dying husband, who's kind of catching wise to Dorothea early on,
Right.
um,
Right.
to her own to her own not benefit, right?
Right.
But yeah, it's I think I think you do a great job in Dorothea and throughout kind of your history of your films on these topics of just showing how pedestrian some of this stuff is, and how it could
Right. Right.
happen to anybody, and never feels like it's getting to be too much. But Chad, I just want to say this is all as always. It's been amazing chatting with you about the film. I cannot wait for more folks to see Dorothea, but I also can't wait to see, the is it the strip? Did you say was the
Oh,
strip killers?
Sunset Strip Killers.
Sunset Strip Killers, and then Richard Ramirez next year. I mean, I hope you're sleeping, because we got to keep you rested so we can keep you at this level of productivity.
Yes, I'm well rested, ready to go.
Awesome. Well, Chad, reminder to everyone watching this, you can catch Dorothea in limited theater run on the 31st of October. So a perfect Halloween film if you're keen to go catch it. And if not, you can go see it on VOD on November 4th from Dread. But Chad, as always, it's a pleasure having you and chatting with you about films, and can't wait to talk to you about the next one.
Same here. Thank you, my friend.
But as always, take care, Chad.